Today we're going to learn about realism, which is an artistic and literary movement from the 19th century. Here are the major characteristics of realism. So again, it occurred in the 19th century. It portrayed political, social, and moral issues without glorifying the past or presenting romantic views of the present. So realism really tries to portray things exactly as they appeared in real life. And it's definitely a response or even kind of a backlash to the Romantic movement that we studied earlier, which really tries to show, for example, the beauty of nature and human life and things like that. Realism especially tries to show a realistic view of life under industrialization and just the harshness of especially urban life. It portrayed everyday familiar scenes as they actually appeared. A lot of the subjects in realist artwork are working class and peasants. They also used en plein air painting, which means working in the outdoors, painting scenes as they appear before them, as opposed to an artist who might work in a studio from a memory or from a model or something like that. And common themes include things like industrialization and commercialization. So one of the things that's important to note about realism does not necessarily refer to the actual style of the artwork. It's not trying to paint things in extreme detail or anything like that. Realism refers to depicting life as it really was. So what I'd like you to do is discuss as a class what elements of realism you see in each of these artworks. This first one is by Jean-Francois Millet, and it's called The Gleaners. And I'll help you out as to what The Gleaners actually means here, and then you can pause and discuss. So these are people who come after the harvest. So if you look in the background of the painting, you can see that work crew has come through and harvested the grain that's here. And then these are people who are coming after and trying to glean whatever they can from what's left over. So go ahead and pause and discuss what you see, and then go ahead and do that for the other images as well. Here's another one also by Millet, The Haystacks. So you can discuss what aspects you see here. Another famous realist artist is Gustave Courbet, and this is called The Stonebreakers. All right, another thing you're going to look at today is realist literature. So realist literature often portrayed the darker side of life, especially in urban areas. And in a lot of ways, it tried to show the hypocrisy or brutality of daily life. By hypocrisy, I would say the Industrial Revolution, in a lot of ways, people felt like it represented progress. But think about all the terrible things that came along with that for the working man, and, is he really progressing? So here are some examples. These you're going to review. If you haven't already done the reading for this chapter, it's going to talk more about these. But I'll go over them pretty quickly, and then you're going to look at two examples. So Balzac and Charles Dickens are two writers who especially showed the cruelty of industrial life, and you'll see that in what the excerpt you're going to read from Dickens in a few minutes. A lot of times they also look at the harshness of the capital system. And it's not necessarily that they're fully advocating a different system, but they're definitely showing the effect that money and profit and entrepreneurship and all of that has had on society. Another famous work is Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert, and this shows the story of rural life and a woman drifting through life. It definitely causes the reader to question what is the purpose of our time on earth and things like that. And then Émile Zola is somebody you're going to read about today, but we're also going to talk about in the future because he was very active politically within France. He believed that he was examining human life from a scientific viewpoint. And so he became active in questioning the way things were in society. So today, you're going to look at an example having to do with workers. In the future, when his name comes up again, we're going to look at the role of religion in society when we talk about him again. So go ahead and pause the video here, and you can look at the examples and discuss those. And then the second part of this PowerPoint is about positivism. So positivism is a philosophy that came about in the 19th century, and it was created by a guy named Auguste Comte. And he, I guess, really tried to look at the world from a totally rational perspective. And so I'm just going to go through a little bit of information about him. So if you'd like to, you could pause the video and discuss this question, what is materialism? That's something that was in a prior chapter. So to be positive, where we get the term positivism from, it doesn't mean positive like it's good. It means positive in terms of certainty. So like we can be positive or certain about the information that we're absorbing. So the clear definition is the only valid knowledge is knowledge gained through scientific method, not religion or metaphysics. And so Comte identified 3 stages that he believed man was passing through. And so I'm just going to go over those 3 stages. So he said first people enter a stage called the theological, or he also called it the fictitious stage. So this is a stage of gods and mythology. So this is religion, totally devoid of any kind of scientific activity. People in this stage explain natural events purely as the result of supernatural forces, of the action of gods, of spirits of good and evil, things like that. And he even identified stages within the stage of the progression of religion. So he believed first people started out with what he called fetishism, which I think we would call more animism or spirits of nature. Then people progressed to polytheism or multiple gods, and eventually to monotheism with an all-powerful or all-knowing single God. The next stage he said man passed through is the metaphysical or abstract stage. And so this he especially related to philosophy. And so an example closer to him in his time period is the Enlightenment. So remember, the Enlightenment philosophers created universal laws based on abstract principles. So they're trying to search for universalities in the world and seek explanations of those. So in this stage, people would explain natural events as a result of abstract principles. And in this stage, we have the intersection of both faith and reason. So, for example, the Enlightenment philosophers really admired the achievements of the scientific revolution. And so they used some, or at least they tried to, some scientific principles to understand the world, but they didn't fully let go of a religious viewpoint of the world either. So for example, John Locke and his natural rights. Natural rights is an abstract concept, but John Locke is also linking it to religion because he says that those rights are God-given and that's why they can't be taken away from man. Deism is another example because remember, deism believes in a creator God, but also a mechanistic view of the universe, that God created this universe, but then it just runs on its own without any interference from any kind of spiritual power. And it's also just important to note that most Enlightenment philosophers believed that religion was important to society, even if they themselves were not necessarily strong believers in Christianity. Most of them recognized and believed that having a common religion and religious institutions was important to provide stability for society. And so the last stage, according to Comte, is the positive or scientific stage. And so to him, this is the only way that people can be fully certain that what they believe is actually true. So in this stage, people explain natural events purely as a result of scientific thinking, observation, and experimentation. So you might remember the word empiricism. That is definitely describing what he believes here. So what's the impact of this philosophy and why do we care? It laid the foundation for modernist philosophy. People like Nietzsche, who we're going to study later, and this idea of man moving fully beyond religion is something that modern philosophers really identified with. And so later philosophers, for example, looked at the world totally devoid of religion and metaphysics. So a good example of this and the influence would be somebody like Charles Darwin. Part of the reason his ideas were controversial is because people believed that it totally removed God from the equation, and that everything that happened in the world as a result of evolution was totally scientific and God was not involved at all. So that's a quick overview of positivism. I just like to go over that because when you read it in the chapter, I think it can be very hard to understand what is this really about. But he's really describing the progression of man, and he really believes that science is the only true way and rational thought are the only true ways to fully understand the world.